In war, there comes a moment that changes everything. A moment when the gun in your hand stops feeling like a weapon and begins to feel wrong. Not because you are afraid of dying, but because you suddenly realize something far more disturbing. You might be the one doing something unforgivable. The battlefield is loud, chaotic, and merciless. Yet, in the brief silence between orders and action, the human mind awakens in a terrifying way. For some soldiers during World War II, this realization did not wait for peace or reflection after the war ended. It did not come with time or distance. Instead, it struck them right in the middle of combat, when survival and morality collided in the same heartbeat. And in that instant, the enemy outside was no longer the only thing they had to face. World War II is often remembered as a simple story of clear sides, good versus evil, allies versus Axis, heroes versus monsters. But real history is never that clean once you step onto the battlefield. On the front lines, inside burning cities, frozen forests, and suffocating jungles, soldiers were not thinking about politics, flags, or ideology. They were thinking in much smaller, more immediate pieces of reality. Survival, orders, fear, and the next second. Every decision was compressed into instinct. Every moment demanded obedience before reflection. And under that pressure, something dangerous began to happen inside the human mind. War does not only force people to fight enemies, it forces them to keep acting without fully understanding what they're becoming while they act. Sometimes, between one order and the next, a strange silence appears in the mind. And in that silence, soldiers were confronted with something far more terrifying than the enemy in front of them. They began to sense the possibility that they were not just surviving the war, but slowly being changed by it. And what they were becoming was not something they recognized anymore. In 1944, as World War II raged across Europe and the Pacific, the fighting had reached a level where survival itself became automatic. Soldiers moved through destroyed cities, shattered villages, and burned-out landscapes where time felt distorted, as if the world had stopped being human a long time ago. Commanders expected exhaustion. They expected fear. They expected disobedience under pressure. But what began to appear in reports was something they could not easily categorize. Not cowardice, not rebellion, but collapse. A quiet psychological breakdown that did not come from physical wounds, but from sudden moments of awareness. In those moments, soldiers were no longer reacting like trained units. They were thinking like humans again, too clearly and too late. One account describes a soldier moving through the remains of a village after a raid. The air was thick with smoke and silence. There were no screams anymore, no movement, only the aftermath. Everything felt unreal, as if the world had been drained of meaning. Then he saw it, a child's shoe, small, ordinary, still intact, resting in the ash and rubble like it didn't belong to the same reality as the destruction around it. There was no dramatic reaction, no shouting, no tears at first, just stillness, because in that single moment, something inside him collapsed. The mind could no longer separate survival from responsibility, orders from consequences, duty from humanity. And when that separation failed, the war was no longer outside him. It was inside him. Modern psychology later gave a name to what many World War II soldiers experienced in silence: moral injury. But in the moment, there was no term for it, no explanation, and no framework to understand what was happening inside the mind. It was not simply fear, and it was not just trauma from witnessing violence. It was something deeper and more destabilizing, the collapse of identity itself. Because a soldier does not enter war as a blank slate. He enters with a sense of who he is supposed to be: a protector, a loyal soldier, a disciplined follower of orders. From training onward, everything reinforces one idea: obey first, think later, because survival depends on it. But the human mind is built on more than obedience. It is also built on empathy, recognition, and meaning. And in war, those systems begin to conflict with each other. One system demands action. Follow orders, survive, continue. The other resists. Stop, this is wrong. There are consequences. This internal conflict is what psychology calls cognitive dissonance, the unbearable tension that arises when actions and beliefs no longer align. In everyday life, the mind can delay this conflict, justify it, or soften it. But in war, there is no time for negotiation. The The pressure is immediate, and the consequences are irreversible. So the mind is pushed toward a breaking point. Either morality is suppressed so survival can continue, or morality rises and disrupts survival behavior. Neither outcome is clean and neither is painless. When survival instinct dominates completely, the person continues functioning, but something inside begins to detach. And when moral awareness dominates, the person may freeze, collapse, or psychologically fracture under the weight of realization. In both cases, the result is the same. The self no longer feels unified. Cognitive dissonance does not resolve gently. It escalates, intensifies, and splits perception into contradiction until the mind can no longer hold both truths at once. And in that moment, something has to give. One of the most disturbing accounts from World War II did not come during a firefight. It did not come in the chaos of battle. It came after everything had already gone quiet. A small unit in the Pacific had completed its mission. The objective was secured. The danger, at least on paper, was over. But something felt wrong in a way no one could explain. That night, while the others ate and talked in low voices, one soldier stayed away from the group. There was no celebration, no relief, no appetite, just silence. He sat with his head lowered, staring at nothing, as if replaying something only he could see. At first, his comrades assumed it was exhaustion or shock, something normal, something survivable. But when someone finally asked him what was wrong, there was a long pause, too long, and then he spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, almost as if he did not want to believe the words himself. I keep thinking they were just people like us. The air around him changed after that sentence, because it was not an accusation. It was not guilt. It was recognition, a collapse of the boundary he had been trained never to question, the line between enemy and human. And in that moment, the war stopped being something happening outside of him. It became something he had participated in, something irreversible, something that could no longer be separated from his own identity. Because once that illusion broke, there was no clean way to put it back together again. Across every front of World War II, Europe, North Africa, the Pacific, similar psychological patterns began to emerge in soldiers who had seen too much, too fast, for too long. At first, commanders interpreted it as fatigue, battle exhaustion, or stress reactions that would pass after rest. But what they were witnessing was deeper than tiredness. Soldiers began freezing at the exact moment they were expected to act, not from fear alone, but from hesitation that came too late for survival instinct to override. Some refused to fire even when ordered, not because they had become peaceful, but because something inside them could no longer reconcile the act with what stood in front of them. Others continued following orders with precision. They marched, they fought, they operated exactly as trained. But something essential was missing. They were no longer fully present inside their own actions. Comrades described it in different ways. One said it felt like watching someone else were my body. Another said the world started to feel distant, as if sound were arriving through water. Dissociation became a silent survival mechanism. Not all breakdowns were visible. In fact, the most dangerous ones were the quietest. Many soldiers did not collapse outwardly. They simply disconnected inwardly. They ate when told to eat, moved when told to move, fought when ordered to fight. But emotionally, something had already shut down. Not death, not escape, but absence. One military medic later described a turning point he could never forget after repeated exposure to battlefield injuries. He realized something had changed in his perception. He stopped identifying the wounded as enemies or allies. He stopped seeing uniforms, sides, or meaning. All he saw was the same thing, repeated endlessly. Human bodies broken by force. That shift was psychologically devastating. Not because it made him more emotional, but because it stripped away the mental structure that made the war feel organized or justified. Once that structure collapsed, there was no internal system left to categorize what he was witnessing. No right side, no wrong side, no emotional distance that could protect the mind from overload. Only consequences, raw, physical, and irreversible. And in that clarity, something became unmistakable to those who experienced it. The war was no longer something they were controlling. It was something they were being carried through. War does something to the human mind that most people never fully understand. It does not only decide who lives and who dies, it slowly changes how a person sees themselves. For many soldiers in World War II, the enemy was never only standing across the battlefield. It began appearing somewhere else, inside their own thoughts, in the silence after orders were carried out, in the quiet moments when the noise of war faded for just a second, in those brief pauses where everything should have made sense, but suddenly did not, because survival in war is not just about staying alive. It is about continuing to function in conditions the human mind was never designed for. And sometimes that survival comes at a cost no one talks about. You come back, but not as the same person who left. The hardest truth for many of them was not what they saw on the battlefield. It was what they discovered inside themselves after seeing it, that in order to survive, they had done things they could no longer separate from who they were. And once that realization takes hold, it does not end when the fighting stops. Because even when the guns go silent, the mind does not always find the same peace. For some, the war stayed behind, not in the world, but in memory and thought, in silence, and in the parts of them that never fully came home again.